try to talk loud so you can all hear me, but it is a very echoing space. So this afternoon, I'm going to attempt to make a butter dish in 40 minutes. This is where we're going. I'll pass this around. So both the bottom and the top are going to be thrown on the wheel, and then altars and slabs added, handles added. Away we go! So I start out with a butter dish. I do a pound for the lid and a pound for the base. Typically, I am using a cone 10 porcelain. Today, this is B-Mix, so it's a whole other, and I'm not even sure if it's B-Mix 5 or B-Mix 10. I don't know. Do you know it's B-Mix 5, so mid-range. But it handles pretty much just like porcelain. So I'm going to start out and get centered kind of low and wide. And I actually really love throwing this piece on these speedball bats, because when I open up, when I get to the edge, the middle is actually going to be just the right size for a butter stick to fit on the inside. So it takes out a little bit of the measuring, which is really nice. So I'm going to start off and center kind of low and wide, and then make my hole, and it's going to go all the way down to the ceiling. And then I'm going to take this donut of clay and I'm going to pull it out until my fingers just kiss this outside edge. So as I start out, my middle finger on the inside is doing most of the pulling, and my thumb is kind of cleaning off the bat as I go. So if you get any moisture under there, this whole thing's going to be attached. And then meanwhile, I'm doing all that with my left hand. My right hand is pressing down to make sure that the clay stays stuck. So I'm coming out, and then right now I can just feel my thumb hit the edge, which tells me I'm just about the right size. And if you weren't throwing on these lovely speedball bats, the interior is going to be about 5.5 inches. And lo and behold, it's amazing. And one of the tricks as you're pulling out a donut like that is to keep it low and wide so you've got lots of adhesion to the bat, rather than if you could pull your chair in. This thing can't listen. But often I'll find in hands-on workshops people try to move out a wall, and that doesn't work very well. You gotta kind of keep it a low, wide donut. And then I'm gonna make my flange, which on the finished butter dish, it's a weird flange. So I'm gonna split this 1/3 to the inside, 2/3 to the outside. Can you guys hear me at all? Yeah. Like I'm yelling. So 1/3 to the inside, 2/3 to the outside. And as I push down, I'm kind of catching this with my middle finger. And I'm gonna push it down, but then I'm gonna kind of turn up the edge. And so what that's going to do, it's going to make this little lip that the lid will sit over, and we'll kind of keep it from moving in space as you move the butter dish around from your counter to your table, table to the fridge. And then all of this on the outside will become the frilly edge. So it's kind of like the butter celebration. Because who doesn't want to celebrate the butter stick? I mean, it is a very decadent thing. Take this and I'm going to pull it up and kind of decide how much of a Maryland skirt we need, you know. And then I really like having my surfaces very smooth and erasing all of those throwing marks. So I always go in and I use 2 ribs to smooth out the edges, get rid of any throwing lines. But it also is going to compress the surface of the clay, so that when I go to alter this into oval and start giving it frilly edges, it can be fast. So I'll do that. And then I have this little skirt hanging out down at the bottom, just because I can't get my finger under all of the clay. And I'm going to take this one tool, cut down, and cut away. one, I often, on most of my pieces, I'll cut the rim to do my undulations, but on this butter dish, I don't. So I know that that's going to stay. So I'm going to make sure that it's nice and compressed and uniform. Doesn't have too much gooey stuff left on it. And then I can kind of see the line from where I put in the... So I'll go in and kind of clean that up. Something like that. Then we have to measure. So I've got a pair of calipers. These are really nice because they're small. Like the Lidmaster ones are awesome, but I never make it with these lid stuff. So these guys are from Ceramic Shop, I think, and they're little. And I'm going to measure inside the moat. So I'll pick this up so you guys can see what I'm doing. So I'm going to go from outside edge to outside edge of that little bead. Or from inside edge to inside edge of the outer edge, whichever way you want to look at it. But I'm measuring in the moat, so kind of from there to there. And make sure that I go right across the middle. And then it's a really good thing to take your calipers and put them on a ruler. And it's 14.6 centimeters, so I'll write that in the middle. And then if I drop these, reset. That's because it's inevitable, you know? Especially in this kind of a situation.
What kind of calipers are you using there?
So these ones are from the Ceramic Shop, and they make a little 7-inch one, which is great when I'm traveling. It fits in my bag, and again, I don't throw anything with a lid that's really bigger than that, so it works really well. So we'll grab the back. I love that they're making all these fun colors now. Hot pink bat, sign me up. I got lime green ones last year, and I was pretty excited about those. Pink and purple. Unfortunately, I've got a whole stack of brown ones. How boring. All right, so now I'm going to throw the lid, which I'm throwing upside down, so it's essentially going to be a mold. I'm also going to open all the way down to the back. And in both cases, that's what's going to allow me to make this into an oval. When you throw with the bottom, it's really hard to severely alter your shape because you've got that circle stuck in the middle. So by opening all the way down, all of a sudden I can stretch out. I wonder what somebody's taking home. It's been the theme of the day, right? Cheering. Talking with a friend the other day, and I was saying that I feel like NCECA is just all about love. I feel like everywhere I look, somebody's getting the most, heartfelt hug with friends that they haven't seen in a long time. And everybody's so happy for whoever won. There's no groaning, oh, it wasn't me. Everybody's just, yay! What a great community we have. So for this bowl, which is going to become the lid, this top edge is kind of the business end. It's what's coming in and out of the piece. So I don't want it to be too thin and fragile because it's going to get knocked around all over the place. So leave it probably about twice as thick as my usual rims are. And the rest of the world probably isn't actually that thick, but Martha Grove loved this. And then before I start to rib, I'm going to take my calipers, and this needs to be an inside edge to inside measurement. And right now I'm a little bit small, which actually in my book is good, because I find when I go in and do my double ribbing, so rib on the inside, rib on the outside, everything always expands a little bit. Start at the bottom, and come up to the top. You can see how much liquid that's taking off of the surface, so these are going to dry a little bit faster so that I can work with them sooner. It's taking away all of the throwing lines, which for me and the things that I reference, there really aren't that many horizontal lines running through flowers, or sometimes dressmaking, you can see that, but they don't serve my purpose, so it makes sense to get rid of them. So then after ribbing, are just about the right size. So I'm going to stretch it just a little bit more. And I'm kind of thinking about the curvature of this lid, how it's containing volume. So instead of I had a straight line and now it's got a little bit of an arc to it. Press that edge again. And pretty close. And then I also have this little skirt at the bottom. Now about a third of this I'm going to end up cutting away. So I'm going to cut some now just to remove a little bit of weight. But it would all get cut off later in. This gives me a nice undercut for my wire tool to go through. I am a pretty neat potter, and this is driving me bananas. I could have cleaned it earlier, but I didn't. Alright, so pop this off. And if you're brave, you can check when it's wet. And it looks like it fits. So now we're going to imagine that 45 minutes has passed. So these have been drying. I threw these, I think, at just before 2:30. So they've had 40 minutes or so. And my husband was very kind and used the heat gun to add another 40 minutes. But they've gotten to the point where we're still flexible. I can still move the edge, but it's not sticky anymore. And for me, that's the perfect time for altering. So what I'm going to do is wire this off. And then right now, the circumference here matches the circumference here. So when I alter, I can't do any stretching. I have to maintain this and this if I want them to still fit when they're another shape. So what I'm going to do, rather than, I think in an oval we usually like put our thumbs on the inside and pull it out. I'm not going to do that. I am going to take my hands, pick up one side and put it down, and pick up the other side and put it down. To turn it internal and something like that. And I like these butter dishes to kind of be multi-purpose wherever anybody's using them. So if I left it sort of long like that, it would fit an East Coast stick of butter really well. It would fit a West Coast stick of butter because they're short and fat. But the Kerrygold butter European chub wouldn't quite fit in here. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to make it into a little bit more of a rounded oval so that that elongated rectangle will fit there. So that anybody anywhere can fit their half a cup of butter. So we've got that one. Then take our lid, wire it off. And we're remembering that this circumference and that circumference match. So I don't want to pull. I'm instead going to put my hands on either side and manipulate it into an oval button. You guys see a problem? I see a problem. Yeah. So right now this is a rocking horse. And that's not going to sit very nicely on there. This measurement is really important. This means nothing to anyone. So I'm going to put my fingers in and I'm going to stretch up here. And when I do that, those corners lay down. Brilliant! Amazing! And if it fit when it was round, it still fits when it's full. And I could have made it even longer if I wanted that to be this sort of a shape instead of that sort of a shape. It would stay. So then we're going to take these guys, we're going to set them aside for a moment. And so
I'm going to get some of those plastic bags.
that's my husband Josh, by the way.
Hi,
Good job,
Josh.
An excellent studio assistant, but he's also part of the tech support crew here at Skutt.
Ah, very nice.
Yeah. Can help you with any kill problems you might have. And maybe has helped you with kill problems you might be having. All right, so I'm going to pull some handles. Do kind of a little mini spiral wedge. And then I'm gonna elongate this out into sort of a tube. And then rather than rolling this or starting to pull right now, I want it to be a little bit closer to the handle size, so I'm not pulling quite as long, I'm not getting the plate quite as wet. So, this is gonna be more stable. Usually I'd be working on a table. Yeah, we're at NCECA.
A clean
Working on the
table.
wheelhead. So I'm just tossing this and stretching it. So as I'm tossing it, I'm tossing it towards myself, and it's elongating. And I'm thinking about this attachment size, and I want this to be a similar size. Now this has shrunk 16%, so it's going to be a little bit bigger. There's more of you here now. This is what we're making. Anybody ask around? That's where we're going. And this is probably enough clay to make 20 handles. Get rid of some. All right. So then I'm going to take my water. I'm going to dunk the clay in the water, get my hand wet, and pull. And for the base handle, so that handle is actually made up of 3 handles. I want it to be fat at both ends and narrow in the middle. So to get that right at the beginning of my pull, I'm going to make a waistline. And then all of my pulls, my hand is going to kind of open as it gets to the bottom. So I apprenticed with a potter in Maine, and when I was between undergrad and graduate school, and she had a very specific handle that she wanted on her beer steins. And part of when she hired me, part of the interview was throwing on the wheel, and so I thought surely this lady's going to have me throw. But that was her favorite part of the process, so she very rarely let me throw anything on the wheel. I ended up pulling tons and tons and tons and tons of handles. And she had this great big 4 by 8 foot table in the middle of the studio, and I'd come in sometimes in the morning and she would be like, all right, Martha, it's a handle day, fill up the table. And I would just spend all day pulling handles. So my hand was really well trained at pulling Monica's handles. But then when I started thinking about, well, what do I want in a handle? And for my mug handles, I really love having a wide attachment, narrowing in to where your fingers are grabbing onto it, and then getting wide again, sort of a teardrop shape at the bottom. So it took me a really long time to kind of retrain myself to be able to leave clay down there. But the trick is you open your hand as you get towards the bottom. So this will go overhead on the top of the butter bed. And then as kind of a nice little detail over the top, kind of makes like an I-beam structure a little bit on that handle that will support it. I'm going to add 2 more little taper handles. So these I'll start narrowing the bottom. And they only have to be half as long as what I just pulled. So they can use some slow guys. Anybody has any questions, feel free to yell them out as we're going. We got one. Yep, 10.
Not since I've been watching. She showed how to wheel throw the 2 pieces, and then she had 2 sitting aside that had been drying for a couple hours, and now she's building.
Yep, I do. I have a
think she did that
version,
last year.
1227 Skutt Kilns. They have EPM elements in it,
I just saw it
which
today.
are made for lots of fire emissions. And so far, I think we've had it for 3 years now. Fire, I haven't had to change the elements yet. And we're firing to cone 6 every 3 days and once a month to cone 10. So far, so good. There's number 2. So the other thing that I did before you guys got here is we have buttered it. Because bit of a problem. We had a great big hole in the bottom. So to fill that in, I need a slab. So I also made a slab a little while ago. But I can show you guys how. I think I gotta do this down here. Okay. So usually I would take a mallet, but I didn't fly with my mallet, so I brought my mallet. I'm gonna take the clay, and I had wedged this. The spiral's going this way, so I turned it on its side so that when I make my slab, it's not gonna have that spiral embedded in it. I turned it on its side, so now it's gonna be layers. So it's gonna make a much stronger slab. If I went this way, it would have a tendency to want to warp and possibly crack in that spiral from the wedging pattern. So turn on its side, and I'm gonna pound it out till it's about thickness of my finger-ish. This is a very low-tech way to make a slab without a slab roller or a rolling pin or any kind of tools. And then I'm gonna take it and I'm gonna toss it. And I'm tossing it towards myself. And you can see as I'm doing that, it's stretching. And I'll go in one direction, and then I'll rotate. And for the butter dish, I need a base and a lid piece. And I want this to be about the same thickness as my thrown parts. So that's probably about good. And so with 0 tools, pretty nice slab. The trick is when you toss, you have to toss with a direction. You're dropping your slab. If you think of like a drip of water on a pond, when it hits, the force radiates out from the center. And so if you're dropping your slab, the edge is going to get thin, but the middle will stay thick. Whereas if you toss it towards yourself, that force is forcing it to stretch. Make sense?
Yep.
The last thing that I always do with these slabs, so I usually work on drywall at home for doing this part. And I'll take a rib and smooth over in 2 different directions. And that's going to compress the clay. And hopefully, some of you went over to the gallery to Spinning Earth. And while you were there, maybe you picked up some pots. And maybe had a nice moment with them. And the bottoms are really, really smooth. I do sand them when they come out of the fine. I wet sand them with diamond core paper. But they feel almost like this when they come out of the kiln. And it's from this step right now, ribbing the clay and really compressing the surface, and it makes that super smooth bottom. It actually kind of amazes me how far that one step right at the beginning carries through all the way to the end. So I do that on both sides. And then with this on drywall with that setup. So typically throw all the parts, pull all the handles, make the slabs, and then hopefully I've got stuff to work on from yesterday while all of it's drying. And I think one of the key tricks to working with porcelain is to make sure that all your parts and pieces are the same moisture content. Especially when you're crazy like me and you're doing field thrown parts and hand-built parts, slabs, and combining all of those things. Now I'll have this friend. And brought a few little pieces of foam with me. So I'm going to make something that is hopefully just about the same height all the way across. I think that might be just a little bit. I love cone box foam. Such nice stuff. So this slab also has been setting up the same amount of time as these handles. I'm gonna make enough space for it. So then we're gonna take this guy, put it on the slab. We'll get a piece that's a little bit too big. I work on a big table. This is fine. Okay. marks. So this is B-mix, so it's a little less true than with porcelain. But porcelain is what's known as thixotropic. And actually, Herrick and I found that this big sculpture body also was very thixotropic, which means that the more you move it, the softer and more relaxed it becomes. It's like if you massage the clay, it just loosens up. And so this slab that right now looks pretty stiff, if I slam it down on the table a couple times, all of a sudden it's super flexible. And so B-mix will do that a little. And again, my porcelain doesn't even do it. So I'm kind of waking up the clay. But as we all know, stretch marks are inevitable. So I'll go back and I'll rib that surface one more time. Now I set this on the table where the throwing competition clay was, so it's not very pretty anymore. It's just a demo. But I'll smooth this side as well. Then I'm going to take the slab and put my little lifter in the center. So one of the things with any clay, but especially with porcelain, that can contribute to cracks is if you take a piece of clay and you bend it up, bend it down, bend it up, bend it down. It's just like taking a piece of metal, and if you do this, eventually it's going to break. The clay will do the same thing. So on that inside edge, if I lift this slab, slump in, and then pop it out, slump in, pop it out, it's going to be a weak spot where I'll probably get a crack. So the foam is going to support it on the inside. So then I'm going to press the two together. We're getting there. So that's going to give me an impression of the bottom of the pot. And then I'm going to take some joining glue. Now this is what my clay at home looks like. So this is my Cone 10 porcelain. I brought some of my magic joining glue from home. I do. So this is bone dry clay mixed with vinegar and some toilet paper. So it's a paper clay. And it's going to show up really well because it's not B-mix. Last year we were using 257, so I was like, well, maybe this year we're using similar clay body. So I brought this stuff rather than the B-mix. So ideally I'd have this slip made with the same clay body. I wouldn't be using a weird clay body, but it's what I've got. So I'm going to take that and apply it onto the surface, both of my buttered dish base and onto the slab. And then score back through. Now many of you may be in the camp of score first and slip second. Yeah? Yeah? I am a slip first, score second. Because I feel like when you put scoring marks down and then lay the slip on top of it, you've always got to go back and score a second time. But if you got the slip there, you're integrating the two the first time through. So I think it's slightly more efficient. But folks would argue. But I think that's always one of the beautiful things about clay is you can do it so many different ways and it still work.
Why do you put toilet paper in? I mean, I know for a fix-it I use it, but I didn't know it just for regular.
So what's happening, those paper fibers are physically bonding the pieces together to make this really work like Velcro. And they're holding them together, and once it gets misfired, they burn out. But they really help to alleviate some cracking. And I started using it back probably before I knew how to attach things very well. I was having lots of cracking issues, and this was one of the things I found that helped solve that. So now that both pieces are slipped and scored, I'm going to press the two together to attach them. And you'll notice I have not cut this to shape yet. It is this really wonky thing. And I'm of the camp, attach first, cut second. Because I feel like if I cut an absolutely perfect shape, peel the piece off, slip and score, try to put it back on, I can never get it to line up in exactly the right place. So it works a whole lot better to attach first and then cut it when it's in place. Now, between my flange, we're calling this a flange, my little nub, and the wall, this is almost an inch wide, or 3/4 of an inch wide, which is quite a bit of material. And I want to make sure that I don't trap any air in there. So before I clean up here or here, I'm taking my finger and I'm pressing in that seam so that the middle gets attached down first. And then, take a brush, and now I'll smooth that seam up between the two, pick up any extras, clean up that edge.
It's just a brush.
It's just a brush. It is a wonderful brush, though, but it's just a brush. So this is a Princeton Catalyst Short Filbert number 4, in case you wanted to know. What I like about it, though, it has a long handle, so if I'm doing the base, I can get down on the inside. The bristles are short. They're soft, but slightly stiff, so they pick up material, but they smooth and don't really leave much for a mark behind. So this is kind of a nice brush. All right, so we'll get all that clean. Now we cut. Now I've tried to teach myself how to cut on this side of a pot. I'm going to cut back here on my side. And typically with my mugs, vases, those sorts of forms, I've cut the underside so that it lifts up off of the table. And the pattern that I cut relates to those undulations. Well, with a butter dish, if I cut, I would cut out my flange. And the butter dish might not sit flat. So I'm going to pretend that there were feet and cut a pattern in a similar way that I would do the rest of my work. So I'm giving myself a little mark at either kind of midpoint of the arc. And then holding my knife kind of in one place, I'm going to start and cut. And I'm making a series of points and curves. All the way around the cut. Now you'll notice that my hand really isn't moving. I kept my elbow down, and I'm using the banding wheel to draw the clay through the knife. That's keeping me really stable and steady, so that I was able to cut a nice, smooth, even line all the way around. So that's our pattern. Then, support structure is always good. Flip this over. And then this edge looks very blunt, like it was cut with a knife. And I want it to have a lot of organicness to it, so that, you know, it feels something like that. So I'll take the sponge, add a tiny bit of moisture, and then I'm going to squeeze it between my index finger and thumb. And that's going to take that very square edge and round it up. I always like to tell people, you know, one of the keys to clean work is clean hands. So you notice I don't have a whole bunch, I mean, there's a little bit on there, but they're pretty clean. So then, I'm going to start right at the connection point, and with a soft rib, start taking that edge and bringing it down to the bottom. And then when it gets pretty close, I'll move to my finger. Take this and smooth it down. And then that line becomes a really beautiful place for me to stop my glaze, to leave all of this exposed porcelain, because it's such a beautiful clay. Why would you cover it all up? But it makes this really beautiful kind of undulating pattern all the way around the edge. Then, this edge feels way too flat. It needs to dance a little bit. But it has stiffened up quite a bit. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to add a tiny bit of moisture. I don't have drips running all over the place, just a little bit on the edge. And I'm again going to take my index finger and thumb, and I'm going to run around this edge and squeeze a tiny bit. And the same way when I slapped the slab down on the table, it woke it up. Now all of a sudden, look how much flexibility I have. And that was really no water, it was mostly just the squeeze. And then we're gonna alter. So I'm gonna take my finger, take that edge, bring it out. Take that middle, down like that. Just like that. Pull this out. And then pull that out. Something like that. Then we'll find our lid, and we're going to check our fit. So I'm gonna place this on, and I can kind of peek inside. And so what I'm looking at is the relationship between the nub and the lid. And as one would hope, it does fit pretty well. But maybe if you try to do this at home, it may not fit so well. So what you can do, so if the lid feels too small, we can move that little ledge in a little bit by taking your finger and pressing here. And that's gonna eat that flange in just a little tiny bit. Now if the reverse was the case, if this was too big, I could put my finger on the inside and push out, and I can move that little flange over. You can also, so that's adjusting the bottom, you can also adjust the lid. So I could come here and I can stretch this way, and move that out. But if this was way too big, I could also set this on the banding wheel. And since it's tapered, if I took my knife and cut off 1/4 of an inch, it would make the circumference get smaller to make it fit the piece. So between those two things, you can usually, like if they're 1/2 inch off, you can usually get them to fit. So it's kind of, you know, some good problem solving, troubleshooting things you can do on this sort of board. Okay. And actually, I think I may do want to move this in just a hair. Like that. So now that we've got our lid to fit really well, and I always like my lids to be able to fit in either direction, because even if you put a little dot, nobody's paying attention at 6 o'clock in the morning when they're buttering their toast. So it goes on both ways. So now, I'm going to think about where this handle is going to attach, and also making a relationship between my treatment of the lid and the treatment of the base. So, I'm going to do some cutting. So first I'm going to give myself some guide marks. So I'm looking at this point, the middle of this point, which is also where that triangle comes up. Giving myself some marks all the way around. And then I'm going to start here. And I'm going to cut down, over, up, down, over, up. All the way around. So like I said when I threw it, this is going to go away. So it didn't matter that we pulled it and pushed it. Now, I usually sit at this point in my working process. Do you want to check one of those? Can I have it for me? You wouldn't let me. You didn't want to give it up. Oh, now I can see. So yes. Yeah. You could open it if you needed it to get smaller. That would make it get narrower. Ooh, that was dramatic. So now we've got another piece of slab. And we'll use a ruler and see. Okay, so this is 6 by 4. So we definitely have our 6 and our 4 here. So we don't need that. So we'll wake this up again. Ooh, she got really dirty. Kind of wake it up a little bit. And then for structure and support, this little point wants to fall in. So I'm just going to take my finger and make this little undulation right there. And that, all of a sudden, when I push down on this versus pushing down on that, it doesn't want to collapse as much.
Yeah, they're separate, but she's...
It's amazing how sometimes those little tiny things really help with the structure.
Yeah, she just said.
Especially when you're working with horses that, you know, become super floppy in the firing process. So I'll take that, put it on the piece, find my trusty red brown.
Yeah, I've been
One time, very long time ago. It's funny, I have another one that I keep trying to break in, but this one has so much good flex in it.
You know what I've decided?
Because I've been using it so long.
Start a large product.
How long have you had it?
Probably since '05. I don't know, when did Mud Tools start making tools? It was about that time. This is like one of the, when they started making the itty bitties. My friend John Blick had a great trick. He would take his ribs and he put them on a sanding belt to make them even thinner so they were more flexible. But I haven't figured out how he held on to it to do that without taking his fingers off. It's sticking. That's a good idea. Duct tape. I don't know.
Mostly it is for water drinking.
So again, we've got our pattern of where we need to slip and score. And we're going to use the wrong color slips once again. Because we're pretending that this is Venus. It'll be fine. Move on to this. Although maybe it's good that it's a different color. You can really see how much I'm putting on. Yeah. Then we'll score. And I'm working the two together. Any questions while I'm doing this tedious part? Nothing? Okay. Well, that's me. I know. It's the end of the week. It's a lot. Alright, so then we'll take our slipped and scored parts, stack them together, make sure everybody lines up. And then once again, take my ribs, press the two together.
These have red.
And we'll set the base. Sticky. Looks like a train wreck. Okay. I'll take my fancy brush. Just come on the inside. To work that seam together. And then, so I can set this down, since it's a rocking horse, I'm going to put a couple of pieces of foam under there. And we can work the outside of this seam. It's not very pretty. Alright. And then I'm going to cut, again, keeping the same pattern as I did at the bottom, so that there's kind of a harmony between the two. They're kind of speaking the same language to each other. How are we doing on time? What time you think we got? I don't know. It's 3:45. 3:45, okay. Well, this place closes at 4:30. Okay. But I'm hoping to be done a little before. We're getting close though. We're down to the handles. So then when I cut this, because of the angle of this, I've got kind of this long edge. So I'm going to go along with my knife.
Oh, and get rid of
And
that.
cut that edge off. So now I'm working with a little bit of a thinner edge to be able to round it. go all at once, it'll hold. The same thing will happen with the slab. So I have to kind of go a little, all the way around. And then I'm always thinking about kind of the gesture of the pot, how it's standing. You know, is it standing proud? Is it really weak? Is it collapsed? And you could almost think of it like in yoga, you do different moves on an inhale versus an exhale. And I always want the pots to feel like they're on an inhale. And this looks very collapsed. Kind of, it looks like it's, you know, it's not full of life right here. So I'm going to come in on the inside and take my finger, and in the center, I'm just going to pop that up. Reaching it out. So then, you know, again, we've got something pushing up from the inside. And it changes its posture. We'll make sure the clay is nice and compressed because it won't get any glaze on it there. And we'll take our handle. And again, it's thixotropic, so it looks pretty stiff right now, but if I give it a little bit of a massage, now it's got more flexibility. This end is kind of fat, and this one is flat. So we're gonna make a match. Like that. And then cut them. And we'll look at the form and see, you know, are we going to St. Louis, or, you know, do we want to be somewhere more like that? So it's good. And I'm gonna cut a little bit of a curve. Right on top. Right on that little corner. So I cut some nice little curves, but when I set this on here, see how it's sitting up on the corner? That's not going to make a very strong connection point. So I'm going to come in on the inside and cut another angle this way. This way. And then, always easier to get to your edges before you attach than after. So we'll kind of clean everybody up. Something like that. And now see how well it sits down on there. Almost like I've done this before.
Once or twice.
Once or twice. We're old friends. Did it right. I think it's good. Now maybe you don't want to do that, but you want to at least be able to do that. And fix our curve. And then we've got these two little guys. A little wet. Flex them a little bit so that they'll bend for me. And then we'll cut them into a nice curve. My knife's I just got this knife yesterday from Sue, and it's so sharp. My one that I've been using for the last year is very dull. And pointy. I think mine is like this long now. That's very neat. Such good knives. Love them. Right here. I'm gonna do something with that. So that little bit of a massage that I gave it ahead of time really helps with not having a crack there. So I'm going to keep track of this clay. because I'm going to make a finial, almost like a little keystone between the two handles. And rather than grabbing fresh clay, I'm going to make it out of this clay so that it's at the same moisture content, so as it dries, it's not going to pop out. I'm just going to make a little like that. And then, if I did it right, this lines up with this, lines up with this, lines up with that, all the way down the other side. Take those little ends. And I'll take them off one at a time. Add a little bit of moisture, almost pull it again. And take that end and then no cracking. And we'll slip and score. And this little handle, it's a great place for glaze to cool and kind of make this nice line running down, but it almost acts like an I-beam over the top of the handle where I'm putting another piece on top of it, so it reinforces it, strengthens it, so it'll be less likely to warp in the firing plate. Or so. So I think I have 12, well now 14, I can work on 7 at a time of those little square bags. So then I could leave that like that, but I feel like when we look at something, we're always looking for a middle point. So when you look at a face, there's a nose. When you look at the body, there's the belly button. There's always kind of that singular in the middle. Our eyes tend to go to the center. And so I don't want the center to be blank. So that's what we're going to use this little finial for. I'm going to slip and score. If anybody has any questions, feel free to come up. That butter dish is still available. If anybody needs a butter dish.
So much.
Yeah, that sounds good too.